the difference between success and failure, between being able to do a thing well and being able to do it not well, between being able to do a spiritual thing and a great thing or no thing, is basically reducible to one word: energy. People I've seen with a great deal of energy, whose energy is going toward material things, if they can redirect that energy, can go very quickly toward God. But people who don't have energy don't seem to be able to do very well anything that they do. The kind of energy, the quality of energy, is another thing that is very noticeable in traveling around the world. I remember 19 years ago I was in Cambodia, and it seemed to me that there were two things there. One was sort of a lack of energy, and the other was, in this lack, almost a dark quality, a dark energy, you might call it. But it didn't surprise me, although it, of course, is a shocking thing, but I can adjust to the idea of the tremendous suffering Cambodia has gone through in recent years. I felt as if that cloud was there long ago, almost as if they were attracting the kind of devastation that they are going through. I found wherever I went that many people were talking about the materialism of America. But my answer was, granted that America is materialistic in many ways, at the same time it has a great deal of energy. And that energy can be directed, and is being directed by some people, toward spiritual success, toward artistic success, toward all kinds of success. Success depends upon the amount of energy that we put out. It's really the difference between genius and mediocrity. It's been said that genius is the capacity for taking infinite pains, or the infinite capacity for taking pains, I forget which. It's not a question of taking pains alone. I saw an article in a newspaper years ago of some man who had come as an immigrant to America and was so grateful for the opportunity to live here, that for 25 years he had devoted all his spare time to making a replica of the Statue of Liberty out of matchsticks. And it was really pathetic that anybody would put so much energy into something so ugly. A lot of energy is put out in a completely wasted way. It isn't a question of keeping your nose to the grindstone. It's a question of using your energy rightly. But it becomes certainly true that the difference between genius and mediocrity is energy. And that energy is, most people, and I'm sure that all of us have experienced this in our lives, the tendency to think, oh well, surely I don't need to put out more effort than this, and it'll be good enough. Anybody who is conscientious has to come to the point where he realizes that the most energy that he can put out is still short of what ought to be done to make a thing really perfect. In other words, if you really want to do well, whatever it is that you have set your mind to doing, you must put your whole self into it. Otherwise, just don't bother to do it. Many people think that it's all a question of just getting inspiration and everything will flow beautifully. Well, there is a fine balance between getting the inspiration, which of course can be a flow, and if you work too hard at it, sometimes that inspiration is cut off. Sometimes with too much trying to round out the edges and smooth out the difficult parts and so on, too much attention to technique, too much attention to method. Very often there is a loss in the actual flow of the inspiration. But what I found is that that flow of inspiration must be kept, but after it's gotten out, after you've put it down, It may take years of hard work in polishing before you finally got the thing really right. I found this in writing music, that there are musical phrases which somehow for years I'm not satisfied with this particular phrase. Just some one note. If you listen to it sensitively, you find, well, it's going in the wrong direction, but what can I do if I bring it in another direction? Then that throws this balance out. And that kind of polishing, getting words so that they will flow freely, so that they will say just exactly what you mean, so that they will say it in a way that other people will understand what you mean, so that they will say it in a way that they will enjoy understanding what you mean. I found in writing The Path that there was a great deal of this involved in bringing that book to completion. It wasn't, the question of honesty, for example, was a very basic one in working on The Path. First of all, to be able to see your own life. This applies to any kind of work, but in The Path it was writing about my own life. To be able to write about it in a way that I would not. You know, the tendency is when you see that you've made a mistake, or when the hint comes to your mind that maybe I made a mistake, oh no, that wasn't a mistake. Isn't it so? The first tendency is to try to say, well, no, other people made a mistake in thinking it was a mistake, or that maybe it was a mistake, but it probably had some divine purpose behind it. Or, well, it could have been a mistake in one way, but look at all the worse mistakes other people make. In one way and another, trying to excuse, to gloss over, to paint in a rosy light, and so on. And one, of course, if he is going to grow at all on the path, and certainly if he's going to write a book about his experiences or anything of that nature, he's got to be able to say, well, it was a mistake. And it was exactly what it was. The next question then comes, after admitting that it was a mistake, to say, oh, how bad I've been such a failure in life, or I was so wrong in doing this. And you read this, especially in spiritual autobiographies, so very often throwing mud on their own heads and beating themselves for being so sinful or being so stupid or this thing or that thing. Mea culpa, I was wrong. And the fact is that it's just not that wrong usually. Usually, once you've admitted a mistake, you tend to exaggerate it out of all proportion, and it becomes a huge mountain in your life. I had this experience once, in fact, in counseling somebody. It was a very interesting lesson to me. I had heard, first of all, that this man wanted to see me because there was this great sorrow in his life that was destroying him. So I said, surely I'd be very glad to talk with him. So he came, and it turned out as he was talking gradually that this sorrow was some great sin that he had committed, some great wrong, some great fault in his character. So I thought, my gosh, has he murdered his mother? Or what's he done that's so terrible? And finally he brought it out. He couldn't even say it in English. He was from Spain, so he had to say it in Spanish. And it turned out to be the sort of thing that a great many people are into, and it's not good, but it's not something to get all that excited about, something to work with and take seriously and try to correct, yes, but not to rule your life by. And so I tried to get him I tried to defuse this worship that he had for his delusion. And I said, goodness, that's nothing. Well, you know, it was the worst thing I could have said. Because to him, this was his God. His life had meaning in relation to this great error. And I had to say, I lost all ability to help him from then on. But if I had said, oh, yes, that's terrible, my goodness. No. Then he'd have understood that I understood properly. And then I'd have been able to say, well, but don't you think that maybe we can balance this with your virtues and with the fact that other people have done a great deal worse things than this and so on. And he might have listened to me. But people tend to, when they are willing at all to face something, to make too big a thing of it, when after all we wouldn't be on this planet if we hadn't something to work out. The fact of being here means we're all in school. We're in different grades of school, but we've all got lessons to learn. And instead of thinking, as I've mentioned in the path, instead of thinking of failure as failure, think of it as not having yet succeeded. Every time you make a mistake, say, well, I haven't quite got it right yet. And that way you keep affirming success instead of affirming failure, and you gradually reach the point, maybe after many years, where you can actually cope with it and succeed. It's like when you're painting a painting and you make some little mistake. You don't say, oh, I've just blown it. You say, well, I haven't got it quite right yet. No, that's not the right color, and so I'll try something else. So then the next thing I found with the path was that after having admitted that it was a mistake, then I had to see it in proportion to the whole of things. And most of all, what I found was that not only to be able to be completely impartial about it, this is a necessary thing, to say that it happened, not, oh, it happened to me, but it's just a fact. These things were done. But why take it personally? Why take the need to succeed or the need to fail, either of them personally? Just say that they're neither of them my needs. They simply are things that happen. But then the next step that comes, I've found, is that then people start boring you to tears with all these confessions that they finally find they can speak freely. All this kind of process is just one little project that I worked on, which I can talk about. But I wanted to mention in relation to energy, that it takes so much energy to follow a line of thought, follow a line of development to a point where it is what it ought to be. The way you've said what you were trying to say, or did the good thing that you were trying to do. And I've seen that in the travels that I've just come from around the world, that people's energy level, by and large, is very small. Master used to call them 1 horsepower engines. Most people don't have enthusiasm. Most people don't have the energy to accomplish anything. And then what happens is that if they do have any energy, usually they direct that energy toward the wrong things. I've seen that it's not only the energy put out by them, they also seem to reflect in their eyes, in their consciousness, even in the way they walk, the kinds of things to which they are giving their energy. If their energy is toward things, if they think that the things that they own are the important things to them, you find that, well, as in all of nature, in the Bhagavad Gita it says that all nature is a mixture of 3 basic qualities. Sattva means the elevating quality, or spiritualizing quality, the uplifting quality in human consciousness. Rajas, or the activating quality, and tamaguna, tamas, which is the darkening or inertial quality, you might say. It draws everything back to a sort of a standstill. In the nature, in the created universe, this physical universe represents the tamaguna, the darkening quality, that which tends to make everything still, unmoving, dull, the lowest level of consciousness possible. And people who think of life and fulfillment in terms of things are actually identifying themselves with tamaguna, so that their eyes also reflect this kind of dull quality. They have no energy or enthusiasm or joy in things. They think, well, the more houses and the more lands and the more everything I get, the happier I will be. The more they identify themselves with these things, the less happy they are. I've noticed an interesting quality in people who work with gems. They almost always have a certain light in their eyes, because gems have a certain kind of life. And working with them, they begin to attract that life quality from the stones, much more than working with most things in this world. people who work with people, people who don't think about themselves, who think about other people, who think about helping other people. There's a life in them. There's a responsiveness to everything. You can see this quality of energy. The things that you're interested in, what you dwell on, what your goal in life is. That's why it's so important to surround yourself with good influences. Good people, good environment, good thoughts, good books. All these things help in very real ways to feed your consciousness and to make you a reflection of those good qualities. But then, and most important of all, is energy. When you put energy into something, what you're actually doing is creating a kind of magnetic field that draws to yourself the things that you're trying to accomplish. If you're wanting inspiration, for example, and I wanted to tie this energy in with inspiration, because so often people tend to think that just if you want to create a good thing, all you want to be is inspired. But even inspiration will not be true inspiration or deep inspiration if it doesn't have this level of high energy. It's not just a question of sort of going to sleep and hoping it's given to you in a vision or in a dream. It's a question of putting a strong thought out, and with that strong thought, then will come the inspiration that you need to do it rightly. I've seen this happen in my own work many times, trying to get an answer to something, trying to know how to do something, and working at it, only working at it, then it wouldn't come. I could put words in many different orders and still they wouldn't make the sense that I wanted them to make, or they wouldn't have the flow that I wanted them to have. And then going into meditation and putting the project itself out of my mind and just meditating on God and feeling His presence, and then with a very strong thought, putting that consciousness on the problem, suddenly the answer was there. Or when you need something, when you need some help, when you need a person to show you what to do and so on, everything seems to flow right, but it comes with energy and not just with flowing passively. One thing that very many people don't understand on the spiritual path, when they see worldly people working in a worried way, working but going in circles and not accomplishing everything, and they see that that's not the way to really get anywhere, because they may get a few dollars in the bank, but they don't have peace of mind, they don't have happiness, they don't develop wisdom. The older they get, the more they look caught in worries and desperation. And so people, young people particularly, say, well, then the answer is not to get that hung up, as they put it, with work. They think if you can flow with the currents of life, that then you will find the happiness that we've been put into this world to discover. They will be able to create beautiful things and so on. And of course, taken as far as that thought is taken, it's perfectly true. One has to be able to flow with the universe. If you're if you're surfing, for example, you want to go with the wave, otherwise you may be knocked out. If you flow with the wave, you can come in all the way to the shore. To understand how to flow with the currents of life is very important. But it takes a great deal of energy to be able to flow correctly. It takes a lot of strength to be able to stand on a surfboard and to balance it properly. It isn't somebody that anybody can get with it and just sort of let the wave take them. It takes a great deal of discrimination and understanding and application to be able to flow with the right currents. Because there are a lot of currents in this world that we do not want to flow with. There are currents of hatred, there are currents of fads, somebody starts a hula hoop and suddenly everybody in the country is doing the hula hoop. And somebody becomes a chess champion, before you know it everybody's buying chess boards. And there are these fads, some of them interesting, some of them less so, some of them good and some of them quite bad. But they are flying around the world all the time. And we want to be able to have this discrimination to say, no, I don't choose to go that way unless I have thought it through for myself and decided whether it is a good thing. Most people will do it merely because everybody else is doing it. We want to be able to flow in the right current. You know, in fact, it all reduces itself finally to the fact that there are two basic currents. One is a current that flows upward toward the divine, and the other is a current that flows downward toward matter. We want to avoid strictly that current that takes us downward into material consciousness, into selfishness and egotism, into atheism and nihilism and loss of all sense of values. Those are very definite currents in this universe. And people who don't think and who believe that to flow with the currents of life is to flow passively and without a great deal of energy and application and hard work, these people don't accomplish anything. Rather, they degenerate. And I've seen this happen. When we were in Cairns in Australia, there were a number of groups there that had tried to start communities, and all these communities were disintegrating very quickly. Many had already disintegrated, but they were just sort of, because they were a low energy level, and thinking that all you need to do is go to the country to form a community, be close to nature, live easily, do everything easily, and somehow that life will sustain you. As it was here in the beginning at Ananda, some people were thinking that God will pay the mortgage for us, we don't have to pay the mortgage. Well, it didn't happen. We had to do it all ourselves. God needs instruments. It's like that story of the priest who was telling this farmer, he said, "What a beautiful farm you and God have made here." And the farmer couldn't quite accept this. He said, "Well, Father, you should have seen it when God had it all to himself." It is true that God does it, but we have to do it with the consciousness that He is doing it through us. If we don't have that consciousness, it will not happen. It is through instruments even that this universe was made. God doesn't do anything except through instruments. Many people say, well, I don't want a guru, I just want to commune directly with God. But we have to go through instruments. We have to go through the instrument, for example, of our own concept of what God is. We don't know what God is. We don't even know for sure whether there is a God. Let's face it, until you know God, how can you know that there is one? You can believe what people say that seem to you to know what they're talking about. You can see that the more I live in the thought of God, the better things go, and the less I do so, the worse things go. You can take your lines of reasoning up to the point where it almost makes it clear that there is a God. But the Sankhya philosophy of India says it quite frankly, you cannot prove God. Ishvara Siddha. God is not provable. By logic, that is to say. It can only be proved, or demonstrated rather, by actual experience of God. So we don't know what these things are, but we have to have the honesty to be able to accept the guidance that we see. And that guidance comes from our own thoughts. As Voltaire said, if there weren't a God, it would be necessary to invent him. We need to have some kind of concept of something higher that we can reach toward. But that's a concept only. It's only an idea in our minds. And any experience that a person has in meditation, until he reaches the actual height of oneness with God, is still only an instrument of God. The spiritual eye, the Om, all these things are instruments through which God comes to us, and similarly we have to be instruments for the divine in accomplishing whatever may be accomplished through us in this world. God does not expect us to sit back and let Him do it all. But at the same time, He does not expect us to say that I am using only my energy. It is my power and my intelligence and my talent that makes possible all the things that I do. Master gave us a perfect balance between these two. He said, your own but God-given energy. It is by the understanding that you have to apply that energy, but at the same time, there must be this sort of opening in the back of your mind to understanding that that energy is flowing into you, and that by willingness, by thinking of that energy, by being grateful to it and open to it and drawing upon it, that then you will have a great deal more energy in the application of your work and whatever it is that you're doing. So it is that by energy, remember this principle, it's one of the deepest things that Master taught. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. By putting a great deal of energy into whatever you do, you draw the energy to do that and to do it well. You don't get inspiration by just sort of sitting and hoping it'll come to you. You get it by putting your full force into it, but at the same time being open to that inspiration to come, so that you're not just keeping your nose to the grindstone. There's always this sort of balance between the two, working hard, but inwardly listening for that guidance. But energy is the secret of success. It's the secret of Ananda's success too. The more we have had a high energy, that's why it's been important at Ananda to be living for other people too. Not to just think about ourselves, not to just build a community for our own happiness, but to build a community that can serve other people. The more we have lived in that consciousness, the happier we have become. Where people who were thinking in terms of, well, we want to find happiness for ourselves, we don't want to be thinking about others, we're never happy. They are the ones who have always found something to gripe about, something that wasn't right, something that could have been better in the community. But those who were thinking about serving God above all, and then God in others, are the ones who have brought this community to a level of success and joy, happiness and harmony that people couldn't have dreamed possible, say, 10 years ago when we first got this property here. Energy. Put energy into anything that you do. You will find that more energy comes. Now, of course, this is why people tend to fall back from that. They discover very soon that you put a certain amount of energy out, and yes, that energy may come, but then the demand of life is that you put more energy out so that you can get more energy. You've got to keep trying harder and harder. And people think, oh no, not that hard, and so they fall back. You cannot fall back, and sooner or later we have to discover that there's either progress or regress, but there is never standing still. You have to go forward, and it's true that if you try hard, you'll get the energy to try harder. But we must reach that point where it is fun to try hard. It is fun to work hard. It is fun to do a thing as well as you possibly can. It is fun. There is joy, because ultimately this energy is a manifestation of divine joy. And there is joy in creativity itself. There is joy in working as hard as you possibly can and knowing that you've done the best job you possibly could. I got one letter this summer that I have to say was a bit disappointing to me. Many people worked hard on getting the path out and were full of joy for having worked so hard. But this one person wrote about how hard the work had been, as if it were a complaint at how hard they'd worked. And I thought, good heavens, that is not what the path of a devotee is. We should never complain at having to work too hard. We should feel that this is our privilege, our honor to be able to work as hard as we possibly can for God, and to be able to look back and say, I gave it my all. This is victory. When you can say that you have tried as hard as you could, the very exhaustion that you feel gives a sense of victory and gives the sense of being able to try harder the next time and maybe get exhausted all over again, but you get the energy to keep trying harder and harder and harder. Ultimately, you have to reach the point where your energy is the energy of the universe, where there is hardly any distinction between you and that universe. This is what a master is. And if you want to become a master, you must realize that the self-sacrifice to which you are being called is total. It's a little scary. That's why people come and dabble their toes in the water a bit and then run away screaming for their lives. It takes heroism. It takes a great deal of determination. It takes complete self-offering to God. It's really, there cannot be a single corner of your life that you can say, no, this is mine. You can have the rest, God, but this one I hold on to. He won't accept less than everything. But the thing is, He doesn't expect you to do it right now or all at once. There is at least that comfort. Take one step at a time, give this much energy, but always remember that whatever energy you're putting out has to be so that you can develop the strength to put out more. Not that so that you can say, oh good, now I've done it, now I can rest, now I can retire and sit in my rocking chair. God will, if you're a true devotee, if you really want Him, I'm not talking to people who don't want Him, who figure, well, my real interest is in making $1 million, but I don't mind meditating 5 minutes a day just for kicks. But if you really want God, if you really want Him, then there has to be this constant putting out more and more and more and more energy. And you will find that as you do so, that you will develop more and more energy, that you are not a person of certain level of energy, that you've got the entire energy of the universe at your command, if you will simply command it, if you will simply develop the power to command it. And this takes simply step-by-step development. It isn't something you can do overnight, of course not, but it does require that you take those steps and not think that anything is too hard. You are doing this for your infinite beloved. Nothing is too hard for that. It is worth all that you've got. This is the simple difference between genius and mediocrity. If you want to be a great soul, if you want to be a genius, I don't say a genius in poetry or music or anything, but a genius as a human being, one who has become a master, that's a true genius. If you want to achieve that in your life, then you must understand that there isn't a point at which you can say, well, I've done enough. I've done that a lot in my life, so I know what I'm talking about. Many times I've reached the point, and I hope that you have too, or I stand alone, where you say, oh, surely this is enough. Surely I don't have to try more than this. They won't see that I didn't answer that question like that. And I found that every time I've done that, Divine Mother has disciplined me. That's the first thing people will pick up. Oh, but what about that? And so you say, oh, all right, you screw up the energy, try again. But it's true, you sort of get dragged kicking and screaming all the way to these things sometimes. But if you're willing to be dragged and put a little effort into it too, then you will find that with this, once you've gained that strength to do it, then you don't have to try all over again or ever again. To that level you've got strength. To that level you can do things. To that level, whatever you apply your mind to, it comes very easily. It's not as if you had to fight the same battles over and over and over again. You reach this level of energy in one particular field of effort, and that same ability can be applied to an incredibly large and expanding number of fields. A person who is very good, let's say, in music can become just as good as a banker, just as good as an engineering, up to that level of proficiency. I don't think that Michelangelo came back and became a better artist. I think when he came back, he figured, I've done it with art, now let me be a scientist, or probably scientist, because he was very interested in that. But maybe he got into something else, like politics or something. But we go from one thing to another, and the thing is that a person who has reached a level of success in one field finds that in successive incarnations, or even in one incarnation, he can be easily a success up to that level in any field that he tries to get into. So you don't have to keep learning these lessons over and over again. The lessons all relate ultimately not to the doing of a particular thing, but to the generating of a particular level of energy. And we have to keep generating more and more and more energy, where a master can know anything that he wants to know about any subject simply because he has that level of energy. He can put out as much energy as he needs to accomplish anything that he wants to do, because he has that energy at his control. When you've developed that degree of energy, and you won't have it until this one final thing has been gotten out of the way, the thought that I am doing it at all. There is always, first of all, there has to be that thought of I, because otherwise there tends to be sort of a slackening of dedication. The ego is not necessarily a bad thing. It's essential when you'll notice that people who are on a primitive level in human society, people living in very primitive cultures. They are, by and large, people who have just come up in incarnations from the animal level to the human level. They have much less ego than civilized men. They are able to endure enormous physical suffering, punishment, without bothering about it. I've told some of you about this, a friend of mine who was a doctor in a clinic in South Africa, working with the primitive natives there. And they would get into barroom fights on Saturday night, and he said one man came to him one time in his clinic Saturday night with his intestines actually hanging in his hands. And he said he almost fainted looking at the man. And the man said, "Don't give me anesthesia, doc, just shove it in and sew it up." It wasn't that he didn't feel pain, it was that he didn't identify that pain very carefully with himself, very closely to himself. It was a fact. He didn't say it's a painful fact. It just is a sensation. But as soon as man becomes too sensitive, he starts thinking, "Oh, my body," and then he starts hurting. So, primitive man has much less ego than civilized man. But civilized man, because he has more ego, because he's gotten into such a competitive and complex situation that he has to somehow rescue his own body and reputation and so on from this great swirling stream of humanity, he has also developed the understanding of his need to reach a level where he can no longer suffer at all. Ego is the incentive, gives you the incentive to grow spiritually. This is why animals cannot progress spiritually. Basically, apart from the lack of sufficiently developed nervous system and so on, basically it's simply the fact that they haven't enough ego to know that they want to do something for themselves to grow. So ego can be an advantage if it's used rightly, not toward pride, not toward selfishness, but to say, I've got to do something about myself. Nobody else is going to do it for me. I have to take the responsibility on my own shoulders, and I have to make that effort. Your own but God-given power. And there comes the next point, where you begin to realize that it really is some greater power that you're using and applying toward becoming successful. This understanding comes on many different levels. Goethe said, I believe he said that it was something like 97% of his inspiration came from other people. All the books he had read, all the ideas of others, it's true for every genius. He was simply brave enough, honest enough to admit it. But very little can one man add to the body of knowledge. Mostly what people can do is assimilate what others have done and then perhaps say it in a new way or add a little touch of his own. And then it seems very new, but it's not. We have built up gradually over many centuries the ability to be able to do the marvelous things that this civilization has been able to produce. So whether we understand that it is not that we do it just by ourselves, but with the help of a whole culture, with the help of many people, or whether we reach that even subtler level of understanding that there's a divine power that we are using, still, ultimately we've got to come to the point where we recognize that we aren't doing it at all. That even this thought of I is only a little swirling vortex of energy, of consciousness in the great ocean of consciousness. When a master can dissolve this thought of I, that is when his energy becomes literally infinite. Because then there is no limiting, no enclosing and shutting off from the universe. There is simply utilizing and a channeling of that force. So a master's power is great enough to be able even to create universes. This is what Sri Yukteswar said, and it's one of the most astounding statements I've ever read. But it's right there in Autobiography of a Yogi. He said when people reach the causal level of universal existence, they have the power to create galaxies. Who knows how long they must stay in that level then? That's a scary thought too. But after all, 1 billion years, 1 trillion years, when you're in God consciousness, they don't even exist. But your power will become stronger the more you can recognize that it's His power that you're using, but recognize also that with will And with strong willingness is perhaps a better word than will sometimes. I will do it, I wish to do it, that you will see that there is nothing that you cannot accomplish. And again, to come back to this thought that I started with, in traveling around and seeing these different levels of energy expression in the world around me, around us as we went, I saw that one thing more than anything else gave people that quality of energy that really made for a successful life. And that was when they lived in the consciousness of the divine within. You could just about tell by looking at somebody, if he thought of God or not. You could see a light in his eyes. You could see a certain joyful smile. There was a boy on the plane coming in from Hawaii to San Francisco, a young man. And just looking at his face, I thought, well, he looks like a devotee. And I looked in his hands, and he was carrying man's eternal quest in his hands. You can tell it. There's a happiness that they have that worldly people can't have. And that, of course, is because of their recognition of the divine source of energy, but also because we develop the consciousness of that we feed upon, that we reflect, the thoughts in which we live. And people who live in this divine thought begin to reflect that divine consciousness. So live more in the thought of God. Live in the thought of His joy. Live with energy in that thought. And that will spell your success in life on all levels. Whatever it is you're trying to do, in your married life, in your friends, in raising your children, in work, in creativity, in anything, energy is what will make for success. Energy is what will make for happiness.